Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our distinguished speaker event. And tonight we have a very distinguished speaker in Dave Heath, founder and CEO of Bombas. And so, Dave, it's really a privilege to welcome you here to Duke.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so first question is, can you recognize your product? Do you walk around looking down at everybody?
I do.
So what do you think?
Yeah, men's dress.
Men's dress, okay. Yeah. In fact, those are Bombas, and so you've expanded clearly beyond the original days of athletic socks. But we'll get into some of this journey. But let's go back to pre-Bombas, and you actually chose your college because you were interested in entrepreneurship, and you've really always just wanted to be an entrepreneur, and Bombas was the outlet that you found. But some people want to be entrepreneurs, but they take it for granted that this is something that just, if they work hard enough, want it bad enough, it's going to happen. But you have some insight in terms of what it takes to actually be successful as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think being an entrepreneur is kind of akin to saying you want to be, a famous actor or an athlete, musician, whatever. Just because you want it and want it bad enough doesn't necessarily mean that you will achieve it. A lot of things have to go right. But like anything, if you want to increase your chances, I always say if you had aspirations to be an Olympic athlete, you don't just say, I'm going to apply for the Olympics next year and see how I do. You go through the training, right? You start at a very early age, you get all the right practice, and on a regular day, you are practicing and training. With entrepreneurship, it's not training your body, it's training your mind. And so, I think long before I ever went to school, I think school helped me kind of hone my skill, but I say that I always walked around the world trying to view the world through an entrepreneurial mindset, which is solving problems through business. And so anytime that I encountered a bad customer experience, whether it's a product, a service, I would kind of always ask myself, like, could this be done better? And I don't necessarily mean could I do it better, but could it be done better? And I would kind of go through the motions in my mind and say, okay, what would I do? What would make this experience or product better? And I try to play it out. If I thought that it was something that I thought was interesting enough, to pursue, or I had, the skill set to do it, I would start to formalize a business plan and kind of go through the motions of writing out everything that you would to kind of define whether there was the right opportunity, and then I'd take that and I'd build a financial model and see, if it held up on paper financially, which majority of the time it didn't, because that's why people say like, oh, why didn't I think? It's like, well, a lot of the times it's because like it just like the math doesn't work, or there's no demand or market for it. And if I got to that point, then I'd start to verbalize it, to people, and I'd say, hey, if you had the same problem that I've had, and just try to talk it out and see if people have the same kind of pain point that I had. Early on, I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I didn't go through that process. Upon graduating, I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I went to school for entrepreneurship. I know everything there is to know about entrepreneurship. And, I started a business, and not surprisingly, it was a pretty epic failure. I lost a lot of my savings. This was like capital being free, and you write something down on a napkin and someone will give you a couple $1 million. I put my own money into it. So that's why I think the lesson was instilled in me better. And I said, I'm not making that mistake again. Every time I'm going to validate the idea like wholly on paper before I ever put a cent into it.
So famously, you came up with the idea for Bombas because you discovered that the most requested item in homeless shelters were socks. People don't really typically give away their used socks with holes in them and so on.
Yep.
And so your brilliant idea was, I want to give socks away. So you were all about social impact, or were you about building a business?
I was about building a business. I came from and I'm probably going to date myself, but I came from like the MTV Cribs generation. So I thought everything you aspired to was these crazy big mansions with tons of cars and all the Cristal that you could drink. So admittedly, I started in entrepreneurship because, I wanted to get rich. Like that's what a lot of people do. It's interesting kind of, my journey into this, business today started with not, oh, I want to create a sock business. I don't think anybody's ever uttered those words in the history of the entrepreneurship. Because, how many sock entrepreneurs do we know? Not very many. And so I saw this quote and I was like, oh, that's sad. Here's an item of clothing that I've never spent more than a few seconds a day thinking about, and yet it's being perceived as a luxury item for 600,000 people living here in the U.S. And living and working in New York City, I saw a lot of homelessness every day, and so I first started by just carrying around socks with me in my backpack. And once I started having human interactions with people experiencing homelessness and giving them a pair of socks and seeing how transformative it was, just that small item, again, this one guy, I'll never get this image out of my head. I watched him take his shoes off. He's like, this is what I need most right now. And he took his shoes off, and one foot he had taken the bandana off his head and wrapped it around his foot as a sock. And on the other foot, he had a plastic shopping bag. A plastic bag in New York City. Like, this is one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And yet here's someone using a plastic bag as a sock. And that's when I started being like, oh, this is a problem I want to solve. And then naturally, because of my entrepreneurial mindset, I was like, I want to solve this through business. I'd seen what Tom's Shoes had done and the buy one, give one model. They had experienced a tremendous amount of success at that point. Warby Parker had just launched and they're applying the same model to eyewear. And I was like, oh, maybe we can have some impact. Certainly not to the size and scale that we have today, but I was like, maybe we can have some impact in this community if I create a business, around donating a pair for every pair that we'd sell.
So you had the idea of donating a pair, and that was kind of the genesis of all this. How did you get the sock expertise? Because it wasn't just that you were going to base this model on giving away socks, you were going to build a better sock.
Yeah.
How did you learn about that?
Yeah, so my thought process went, okay, if we need to donate a lot of socks, we need to sell a lot of socks because they'll buy one, give one. And if we wanted to sell a lot, we'd have to create a product that was truly unique and distinguished in the marketplace if we wanted to kind of, have real success and scale. And so, not having worked any part of my career in the apparel industry or retail, I looked at the, customer data set of one. I looked down at my own 2 feet and I said, okay, like what are the things that I don't like about the socks that I wear? And at that time, I was kind of probably like most people. I'd go to like Costco or Walmart and buy like a 12 pack of Hanes, socks for $15 and call it a day. Because I just thought that's what socks were. After a few washes, they'd feel scratchy. I'd constantly be pulling them up throughout the day because the elastic would inevitably break or wear down after a few washes. I have sensitivity issues, so I'd always be adjusting the toe seam, that like annoying ridge in my shoe. And so I was like, all right, well, I want to learn about every product that there is available in this segment. And despite most people buying this core mass-produced commodity type product, there was a whole subset of specialty product, mostly focused on athletic pursuits, so running, hiking, basketball, soccer, you name it. And there was actually hiding in there was a tremendous amount of technology innovation, as you would expect. If you're going to run 26.2 miles, you're not wearing the same white pair of tube socks that I'm wearing to work every day. You're probably going to wear something more specialized. And so, as I started to test and wear those products, I was like, wow, there's a lot of features and innovation here: seamless toe, arch support, comfort footbeds, fabrics that wick moisture to regulate the temperature. And I was like, I'm not running a marathon, but my feet feel better throughout the day. And then I kind of came with this like brand hypothesis, which are like athletes aren't the only ones who should need to feel supported throughout the day. Nurses, firefighters, doctors, real estate agents, we're all on our feet. You're a parent chasing their kids around, like, we're all moving throughout the day. And I thought, maybe this is a place where I could take some of this technology and innovation and bring it more to the mass market, and hopefully convince the mass market to upgrade into more of a premium category for a product that they're wearing every day. So high utilization, typically an item that they're putting on first thing in the morning, taking off last thing at night. And I saw actually a lot of parallels between the concept around marketing mattresses, where it's like, oh, you spend 30% of your life in a mat, asleep, spend up for a good mattress. So I was like, that makes sense to me. And I was like, you spend more time in your life probably wearing socks than you sleeping. So I was like, why should you not upgrade that as well? And so that was kind of my hypothesis, was like, take technology innovation and position it more towards the mass general population.
Okay, so there are now two things. One is you're going to have a sense of purpose in addressing an area of need. Second, you're going to create a product that's better than what's out there now. But then the third thing is you decided to go direct to consumer with socks. I mean, who sells socks direct to consumer? So how did you come up with that idea, as opposed to saying, well, we're gonna get placement in Sam's Club? Or did you decide it's margins? It's that simple?
No, I think this is part of like where time and I don't know, like how you want to phrase it. Like 2013 is like right around the time we're thinking about launching, and a lot of brands are starting to pop up that have a D2C focused component mostly to them. I had worked at a digital magazine with one of my co-founders for 5 years, like a digital publication. So like digital felt familiar to me. He was really good at brand storytelling in the digital way. And then also he looked at the retail, like the in-store, and I was like, oh, the packaging is, for socks is like 2 inches by 3 inches. I was like, I don't know how we're going to tell a deep story around mission and product innovation when you've got, a piece of real estate that's this big and you have to put the logo and the size and all these other things. So it's like, it feels, and that was a little bit of like, here's the chance we're going to take. It was definitely not validated, but I said, okay, we're going to try this online thing. But in the kind of MVP, mindset, we said like, all right, we're not going to go out and build a website first. Like, how can we get a read on the digital marketplace for our product and our storytelling, a mission, product category, without a huge investment? And so crowdfunding was kind of relatively new at that time, Kickstarter, Indiegogo. And so we said, all right, let's create a crowdfunding campaign, bleeding edge adopters. So it's like, you'll get a good read on if people find it interesting. You can put a video out and take orders without having to produce the product. And it's a marketplace where consumers are willing to sit through a 2 to 3 minute video where you can really have their attention on explaining all the details of a pretty insignificant product otherwise. And so we said, oh, that's what we're going to try. So we launched our Indiegogo campaign, and within the 30-day campaign, we had sold $150,000 worth of socks without somebody ever touching, seeing, or feeling. And I was like, okay, I think this is a proof point that I think this might actually work. And then we went from there and we shipped the product. And then we said, okay, once people get the product, how are they going to behave from here? What do people repeat? Do people reach out and tell us they hate it, they love it? Like, all of that stuff. And we continued to use, that was when we owning the customer relationship. We used as validation and, ideas to iterate as to how best to go forward.
So you've got the business going, and then Shark Tank approaches you, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to you trying to get into Shark Tank.
Yeah.
So you're talking about free money. This isn't exactly free money when you go on Shark Tank, but it's free publicity. So were you really excited when you had this opportunity to go on Shark Tank, or were you really not sure this was the right way to go?
So it's funny because it's April 2014, we launched August 2013, and we get an email from like casting123 Shark Tank at gmail.com. And I was like, I'm just waiting for these people to ask me for like my bank account information and that I need to wire them some money or something. But weirdly, I guess like they must turn casting agents over so many times they don't even bother giving them real email addresses. But we were like, all right, like if they're reaching out to us, we'll take the call type of thing. And they're like, we found your story on Indiegogo. We saw your success. We feel like could be an interesting story to tell on Shark Tank. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, if it means not standing in line with 40,000 people, like waiting to audition in Brett, which like, I'm not going to do that. But like, they're like, no, like you could put you in front of the producers. And I was like, yeah, this is fine. There was like no downside to it at this point. And so we kind of went through the process, and inevitably they ended up picking us. And we filmed in June of 2014. We knew that we had a deal, but they kind of like, they go into the diligence phase and they say like, well, really the way they operate is that like they don't sign the deal until they know that you're going to air on, get public, publicized, because then they want to see how it performs. Like, is it a dud? Do people really love it? And then they try to go from, and create a deal from there. And by that time, so filmed in June 2014, aired in September of 2014, and during that same period, they're like, operate the business as if it's never going to happen, right? There's no guarantee any step along the way. And so we were in the middle of a fundraise at that point anyway. And so I was going out and talking to friends and family and angel investors, and we ended up closing $1 million seed round in that period of time. And then our episode airs, and they're like, great, we're ready to do the deal. And I was like, we don't need the capital anymore. Like, we're not going to be overcapitalized, by 25%. That's crazy. And like the business is in a much different place today. So we kind of like willingly on both sides renegotiated the deal to something that felt, fair to both sides. And it was a massive game changer for us at that time.
Yeah. So the $1 million valuation that is the public version, you have the ability to go back and.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, we did, but I don't know about everybody else's.
Yeah. So that valuation, which when you were live on the show, the deal was cut, were slightly more than $1 million valuation. What's the valuation today?
We're a private company, so we've never historically publicly disclosed our valuation numbers. I also think, valuations are like baseball cards. It's like, it's only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. We did a fundraise we were about to go public 2 years ago, did something that was, at a very, very large number, that would probably be, if we were a public company, probably 70% of what it is today, but nothing has changed from a business perspective. So like, I kind of think the world has been too focused on valuations in my personal experience. Just run a good business.
Okay, so you mentioned the idea of doing an IPO. Before we get to that, there's a step which is you became a benefit corporation. So tell me, how hard is it to go through that process of being registered as a B Corp?
It's gotten a lot harder than what it was, but even when we got certified in our third year of business, and at that time, it was, I'd heard about it early on. I was like, I really want to do it. It feels right. It feels like the right message to put out into the world. But there was a point at which we were like kind of too small to even, get certified. There were like 8 people, and they're like, what's your maternity and paternity policy? I was like, nobody here is pregnant, or having kids. Like, wow, this seems like a waste of time. So it didn't, and it is a pretty arduous process. And finally, we had this one employee in our third year business. We're probably like, 40 or 50 people. This one guy was super like obsessed with social responsibility and sustainability. And he's like, why aren't we a B Corp? And I was like, honestly, we just haven't had the time really to do it. And there's no one to project. And he's like, I'll do it. I'll like project manage it and the whole thing. And so he single-handedly like interviewed everyone in the organization. You have to kind of fill out these questionnaires and develop policy and all this stuff. And I think when we first got certified, we got like a score of like 75 or something like that. And then every 4 years or 5 years, you have to be recertified. And it's getting a lot harder. And then, so last time we got certified, I think we got like a 92, which just, I think, shows the evolution of our company and having resources to actually be able to invest in some of these initiatives.
I want to probe on this a little bit because you've got at least 2 customer segments. Technically you've got a lot more because you've got athletic socks, you've got business socks, you've got you've moved into underwear and so on. But you have, broadly speaking, paying customers and non-paying customers. And so how do you make decisions in terms of what you want to give to the non-paying customers, where you may not have the market forces that tell you, these socks are going to sell or not. So when I buy a pair of these socks, are you going to give a pair of these socks to the non-paying customers? I mean, I know the answer is no, but how did you come to the decisions about how you serve the non-paying customers?
Yeah, and just to clarify, in case people don't understand, like our non-paying customers, we consider the people in the homeless community who are getting our, donation product. And I think it was a key distinction for us very early on to refer to them as customers, because we kind of discovered this through the process. We originally donated exactly the same product that we sold. And that was important for me because I was like, I don't want to perpetuate that these are second-class citizens so they get some cheaper product. But in handing out the product and in starting to distribute the product through our giving partners, a lot of our early socks had, they were like black and gray with like bright neon blue, yellow, orange, and pink. And we constantly got requests back from people that were like, hey, people just want some plain black socks, no branding, no bright colors. And I was like, oh, why is that? And they said, well, a black sock shows less dirt. It's, there's like a dignity aspect to it. And when I learned that, I was like, wow, right. Maybe we're not serving the needs of that customer group the same way we are with our paying customers. And so we went on kind of a listening tour with our giving partners to really understand, like, what are the things that they are looking for in a product? Well, it's durability. It's obviously, the dignity aspect of darker colors, and then, longevity. And then we added this one other feature around, an antimicrobial treatment that prevents the growth of fungus and helps with odor because they weren't able to wash their products. So we redesigned our donation product to have, we reinforced all the seams so they lasted longer. We used darker colors to minimize the visible wear, and then we used antimicrobial treatment to prevent the growth of fungus. And that's when we started realizing, we're serving different needs with these 2 different customer groups. And at the time, I really had this idea of like wanting to invest and build a brand in the homeless community the same way that we were building a brand for the paying customers, again, from like a dignity and really nobody has ever sat out there and said, I'm going to create a brand, specifically a brand for people who don't buy anything, right? A customer group that's not paying for something. And our kind of general commitment to approaching it that way, I think has shown our paying customers that we're a truly authentic brand that really goes above and beyond and delivers on our mission, not just in donating the product, but truly serving the community. And then it's really rewarding, still to this day when I'm out in New York and I hand someone a pair of socks and they're like, oh, Bombas, I love these socks. I know that you guys give a pair for every pair. It's like, it's amazing to like, these people aren't like, they're not getting our marketing materials. Like, they're not, getting our Facebook ads. And yet they know the brand story the same way that our customers do. And I have to remind myself, I'm like, right, we've shipped and delivered over 100 million items to paying customers which means that there's also 100 million items of donation items that are out in the homeless community. So naturally, at that size of scale and volume, people are going to take notice, especially if the product is truly superior.
How do you make decisions? Like you have 3,500 partners. How do you make decisions on the partners you take on? How you allocate the product across those partners without the market forces to guide that?
It's really, so we have an in-house team. So I think another thing that's quite unique in the way that we do our giving is a lot of other, like for good companies, they'll pick one partner and they'll kind of outsource the giving to them, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's like they're not experts in shipping glasses throughout the world. It's like here's World Vision, give them all of our eyewear and let them kind of distribute it. Which is kind of, I believe in that philosophy of stuff. Focus on what you're good at, but in order to remain kind of authentic and be able to tell that authentic brand story to our customers, I wanted to stay close to our end customer on the giving side. And so we built a small team internally called our giving team, and they manage those 3,500 giving partners, that relationship directly. So every year they get a survey that says, how many socks do you need? What type of customer? Are you serving men? Are you serving women and children, families? Do you need warm weather product? Do you need cold weather product? Like what's we really understand it on a need base. Some are small, can only take 250 pairs a year, and then some can take 10 million pairs a year. So we try to understand what each partner needs and then deliver them what they need based off of that kind of interaction that we have with them.
So to put my next question in perspective, I believe that Bombas is the most successful company ever on Shark Tank in terms of the sales.
Yeah.
So you passed the $1 billion mark.
1.3.
In sales. And you mentioned earlier an IPO, and I'm wondering, has there ever been tension for you in serving your different customer groups where you go, how much can we invest here and the ones that are the give ones versus what we invest here and the buy ones, and what's that going to do to our margin?
Yeah, luckily for us, the business is built on that model. So like from day one, all of our forecasting and projections were based on this kind of, the margin was built in for the donation product. In actuality, we've gotten better efficiency on the donation product, not because we've changed anything or invested less in it, but because as a single SKU, and it's not really a single SKU, but like we've consolidated, right? We've got probably 6 socks that we produce for the donation item, and we're producing hundreds on the paying customer side. We get massive economies of scale by being able to run the same product at volumes of, this year we'll do 30 million donations. The factory partners being able to run that, that factory run, drives the cost way down.
So I guess where I was...
No, we've never, it's never considered ever having, it's never even been up for debate.
Okay. So where I was headed with this was, do you think it would create tension if you become a publicly held company?
I don't think so, because again, I did a roadshow, I talked to investors. I think a large component of the stickiness, and if you look at all of our brand data and our NPS scores and everything related to the brand, Bombas does not exist without its mission. Mm-hmm. And so, and we were going to file as a B Corp, and that way we cement kind of, from a public standpoint, we cement, what our
fiduciary,
from a fiduciary standpoint, what we are committing to, and it protects even long time after I'm gone and the board changes over, whatever. It would take a serious amount of effort to undo that.
Yeah. So IPO is not necessarily off the table in the long term.
I mean, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, if you had a crystal ball that could tell me what the next 3 years will look like, then maybe I could better tell you. But no, we're opportunistic, right? And we want to set the company up for the best outcome possible. And I don't just mean financially. I mean, I really do believe we're building a brand that I hope was around for the next 50 to 100 years, like all the great brands that have come before us. And so I will only do what I believe will secure that outcome. If that's public, if it's with another sponsor, if it's with a private company, we'll see.
So you, as I said, you've extended the brand into some adjacent spaces. The places where you expanded were the number 2 and 3 most requested items in homeless shelters. Is that the formula for future expansion, or are there other ways that you can grow this model, simultaneously growing the purpose, the social impact, along with the overall scale and size and profitability of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I look at our 5-year roadmap, and we don't have any other product categories outside of continuing to expand within socks, tees, and underwear. I think there's a tremendous amount of runway there. I look at a brand like Hanes, which is doing $4.5 billion in revenue in essentially the same products that we're in, but at a average price point of a few dollars a pair. And if we're at average price point $10 to $15, an item, we could still grow tremendously from a volume perspective. And look at the data, and most of our customers are switching from the low-cost commodity brands. And I talk a lot about internally around like comparing ourselves to Starbucks in a weird way, whereas Starbucks entered the coffee market, which was highly commoditized when they entered it. You could go out into any deli or corner store or whatever, and a cup of coffee was a cup of coffee, and it was 50 cents or maybe it was $1. And then all of a sudden Starbucks shows up and they are like, oh, our coffee is $3. And you're like, what, a 300% increase over what I'm normally paying for this? That seems crazy. But it's a consumable, everybody uses it every single day. There's a lot of value that people can obviously get out of their coffee experience. And now I don't think you can go to a city in the world that doesn't have multiple Starbucks in it. And I think now coffees are like $6, $7. It's like crazy to me. So I think if you have the right product and you have the right value proposition, even being a premium price point product, we still are trying to be a mass premium product. When I was growing up, sneakers were just white tennis shoes that were $20, and then Nike shows up on the scene and they're like, no, they're $100, and now they're like $300. It's so like I've seen enough pattern where I think if the value proposition is strong enough, I think you can convince customers to eventually spend up over time. So I think we've got a lot of runway on the product side, but talking about kind of the need-based aspect, I think we're lucky, maybe it was obvious, I don't know, that underwear was our second most requested item from our customers, because I think point to Hanes and Jockey, and these are items people typically buy together: socks, underwear, t-shirts, top drawer, basics. The first 3 items you typically put on in the morning, the last that you're taking off at night, the 3 that are most closest to your body throughout the day, where comfort really matters. And I think similarly, because those 3 items are closest to your body, and they tend to wear out. They are the 3 most requested item at homeless shelters as well. So the marriage there was really was obvious and kind of worked out well. Beyond that, I think we've always decided we would lead with need-based first. So, for example, if we said, oh, we want to create sweatpants, if sweatpants weren't the next most, like maybe it's a hygiene kit that has soap, a razor blade, and some deodorant in it, which we know in working with our giving partners, those are always in high demand. Maybe that's the better product to give. I got a long time before we have to solve those problems, but it's kind of the philosophy and how we think about it.
So you offer these crazy customer guarantees. You guarantee their happiness and lifetime. I mean, socks don't last for a lifetime. But I assume that because your customers are also purpose-driven, that's not a problem for you in terms of people, sending back socks after 10 years saying, hey, they wore out, I'm not happy.
You know, I've always kind of believed if the customer for the most part will be honest. So you'll get some people who will take advantage of it. And, I don't want to punish the good for the misdeeds of a few. It's not how I'm going to run my business. Our culture's not that way, right? It's not, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And at scale, $400 million of revenue, like scamming is not a big enough issue for us where, and we've got, our return policy even is such that like, even if you buy the product and you got the wrong size, we tell you to keep the product. It's actually cheaper for us than paying for shipping and whatever. So you might order 8 pairs of socks and say, oh, keep them. Someone will be like, aha, I found the loophole. After a while, if somebody's doing that enough, we kind of figure it out and we say no. But like most people are genuinely honest about it. And look, I being a mass brand, if I'm selling a product to somebody who maybe can't really afford the product, like and be able to rebuy it as frequently. And after 5 years, if they made $100 investment, that was a big investment for them in a bunch of socks. If that person wants to come back and say, I got a hole in it, can you replace it? It's like, yeah, sure, no problem. I don't know, it's like, fine. It's such the minority that, most people aren't trying to game the system, looking for free replacements for life. But if that's what you want, like, you want to spend your energy and time doing that for free socks, it's like, fine, then you win, I guess.
Okay. So I want to be sure the audience is prepared to ask their questions, but I've got at least one more here, which is kind of the classic situation of a founder build something, and how do you make that transition from founder to CEO to running what is now really a big company? Does it take something that's really different that means that you lose touch with those entrepreneurial roots?
I mean, I think one of the hardest parts, particularly about being founder CEO, is that your job changes probably more than anybody else's does in the organization. What is required of you in day one to start the company is very different than what is required, when you're at real scale to like kind of run the company. I think one of my greatest strengths has been a high degree of self-awareness. And so I've always been very honest when I feel like maybe it was beyond my skill level. In year 5, I hired an executive coach, who massively leveled me up, through a lot of, big growth moments in the organization. There's a great article called The 3 Stages of the CEO. I can't remember exactly where it is, but I'll send it to you and you can kind of distribute it out. But it talks about like what stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and kind of a growth factor. And, I think good founders they serve the organization versus having the organization serve themselves. And so I've always asked, and I will continue to ask the question, do I provide as much value in my role today as somebody else could? And I think in this next phase, I'm not necessarily sure the answer is yes. I really like building, and we're past the building phase. We're in the operating phase. And the CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch sits on our board, and I see what a really good operator at multi-billion-dollar scale looks like. And I see the questions she asks, and I don't look at the business the same way she does. And I kind of ask myself, I'm like, I think the business needs that more than a visionary. big strategic thinker, because a lot of the strategy and vision is set. So, yeah, these are good questions.
So I'm going to ask one more silly question and then turn things over, which is you motivated your team early on by saying, I'm going to get a tattoo when we give away our 1 millionth item.
Yeah.
So are you still using that as a motivational technique? And how many tattoos have you accumulated therefore?
I no longer use it. So I had no, my mom was not happy about this promise, but I made it. We hadn't sold a single pair. We hadn't donated a single pair. So I was like, this is, it's a good problem if we hit that. It was my first tattoo. Many people have tattoos. It's very addicting. I think I probably have 15 or so now. They're all pretty small, but no more bets or promises.
Okay.
I thought at one point that like maybe, I'm glad we didn't do it because I really don't like heights, and I thought like maybe I'd commit to jumping out of an airplane.
Ooh.
Like if we did one, but I don't know. I like the idea of pushing myself out of my comfort zone. That would have been a really hard one for me though, because I don't really like planes, and so jumping out of one does not really appeal to me.
Okay. All right. Questions from the audience, and if you could move up to a microphone to ask your question, that'd be great.
I think for speed and efficiency, if you want to start lining up at the
Yeah,
microphones,
there are 2 microphones in the back. If you could just start going there to ask the questions, please.
Hello, I'll start us off. My name is Dr. Chillian Small. I have a PhD in clinical counseling, and I'm also a Gemba Global Executive MBA student here.
Cool.
And I'm often looking at how I can touch people in a meaningful way. And you said my products are basically the most intimate. They touch the most intimate parts of us. Just curious, have you guys looked at the mental health results of what you guys are doing as far as the products you are providing the homeless population?
Yeah, it's interesting. So last year, we put out our first impact report, and it was the first time we really surveyed all 3,500 of our giving partners to really understand what value are we providing. And the biggest thing that the majority of them came out, so I think it was like 99%, really helped with their outreach. So trust is a really hard thing to build in this community because for the most part, you've been treated very poorly, ignored, not treated like a real citizen. And so a lot of people in the homeless community have developed a lot of mental illness purely based on the fact that they're, for the most part, being seen as invisible and oftentimes a burden. So it's very hard for them to trust people who randomly approach them on the street. Half the time, someone saying, "Get out of here, pack up your stuff, you make this place look bad." So by handing out an item that they need helps start a conversation. And then open up, hey, would you be interested in other services? So we still have a lot to work to do on kind of continuing to quantify our impact, but, and we never really set out to say, oh, we're going to solve homelessness, right? Like that's not our role. We thought about it at one point. We're like, all right, should we open up homeless shelters? Should we do what else could we do? And the answer really was like, no, we need more of what we're good at, which is selling product and donating product. Then enables, what's called, we could help the helpers. Like we help the people who are then on the boots on the ground, who are actually qualified to, in their own communities, help the people who need it. So it's a great question, something that we continue to try to, really, really track and look into. Thanks.
So this side?
Hi there. I have a question. So how do you raise funding from a crowdsourcing website? Like, how do you convince people that your business idea or your vision, and they are willing to pay for that?
Yeah, so I think a quick clarification. When we did crowdfunding, this was before the Jobs Act, which I think has since changed, which actually does allow, it's like kind of real crowdfunding. Like you can actually raise fundraise from the consumer population. We just it was basically like a pre-sale. That's always like our form of crowdfunding. So it was more like, hey, these socks are normally $50. If you buy this 5-pack today, you get it for $40. Would you buy, from us today? So it was really almost like a pre-sale mechanism than it was raising money for the business specifically. Because we were selling product, we knew we had margin built in, so we could take some of the profits from, less the cost of goods sold. We could take some of that profit and, invest it in building a website and, some of the things that we ended up doing. But it wasn't like we didn't sell equity, through the platform.
Yeah, and a follow-up question on that. So when you do the pre-sale, how do you convince people that your socks are better than the existing socks there? So is that kind of similar technology
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, that's the marketing, component of it. We put together a 3-minute video, and our process was, we looked at kind of all the other really successful crowdfunding campaigns at the time and tried to understand what the format looked like. How did they open the video? What did they talk about next? And we tried to understand, see if there were patterns in, the brands that did it best. And same kind of approach we took towards Shark Tank. We were like, what were the companies that got the best deals and whatever? And we, what questions did they get asked? How did they answer them? So we kind of broke down that process and really understood. And then some of it was that is like, I don't think we went into it being like, this is going to be a huge success. We were like, this is where, we see if the messaging that we put out resonates with the customer. And I think in our case, we got lucky that it did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Gabby. I am a second-year MBA graduating in May. Thank you so much for your time. I'm a big Bombas fan. So as we're thinking about, our post-graduation plans, starting a new journey, just curious if you have any advice for us, seeking to be successful business leaders such as yourself as we kind of graduate and start a new chapter.
Yeah. I would use your career choices as kind of continuation of learning rather than, go make a bunch of money. Like, so if you are really interested in e-commerce, and you're like, I think one day I might want to start an e-commerce brand, go work for an e-commerce company. Try to get as much exposure as you can. And hopefully, you work at a place where, the culture is approachable. I tell all of my employees, it's like, I would celebrate if any of you wanted to leave here and start a company. Nothing would make me happier. So then those that are interested, I set up coffee with them and, how did you do this? How did you do that? It's like, I look back on my time at undergraduate at Babson and I think back what a waste of time. I didn't fully make, I had, the founder of Jiffy Lube taught one of our classes. I had, the founder of Home Depot would regularly come and audit. I never set up office hours with these people. I should have. There's so many resources, that you have available to you. But the best advice, again, I could say is don't try to leave here being like, I gotta go to the job that pays me the most. It's go to the job that, treat it as almost like an investment in yourself, where you can learn and develop skills that you think would end up making you a better entrepreneur later on.
For sure. Awesome. Part 2, are you hiring?
We have some open roles, not as much as the economy is challenged right now. So we've slowed hiring a little bit, but yeah, take a look at our job page.
Hi there. Thanks so much for being here. My name's Marley Margolin. I'm a weekend executive MBA student. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience exploring a potential IPO and the conversations you were having and the role that mission played in those conversations. I'm curious if there was appetite or maybe even pressure from investors. It's such a clear part of the Bombas brand story, but curious if you see broadly in the market that's something that investors are looking for.
Yeah, great question. I think our initial decision to consider an IPO was a very frothy market, like I think a lot of people. we weren't in a place where we were looking to raise capital necessarily, but if brands are going out at 10 times forward-looking revenue, it kind of almost feels foolish not to try to capitalize on that. But I'm glad that we missed the window, because it didn't fare too well for what goes up comes down. A lot of those brands are 70, 80, 90% off their IPO price, which is a very, very tough spot to be in, particularly with your employees. But as part of the roadshow process, we met with them, and I'm forgetting the specific acronym, but there are a lot of funds now that have kind of social entrepreneurs, sustainability kind of funds dedicated within Fidelity and T. Rowe and all the big mutual funds, where they have pockets of money that are set aside specifically for kind of do good, socially responsible brands. I can't say that in all of the conversations it was a selling point. I'm not saying it was never a detractor, but at the end of the day, a good balance sheet and good financials, is I think what most investors are looking for. But particularly, I think there was a subset. They were like, well, if I could get a good return and have positive impact, a lot of them had that specific remit. So we fared better, I think, with that group of investors. But overall, money was free, so I think everybody was very interested at the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm an international undergrad freshman. I had one question for you. I see that you're very focused on selling right now. I wanted to ask what the next big step is for you. Is it just meeting the demand right now? And once the homeless shelters are saturated, is that when you think about the next big step?
Well, can you clarify, when you mean selling, do you mean selling the organization or?
Selling your product and making sure that each homeless shelter gets your product.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I mean, so, we went through this kind of executive exercise where we had a lot of people who are like, we need to tell the company, like, what's the number one thing we're focused on from a goal perspective. And, we debated, well, we could say it's revenue, or but then the mission's not in there. And I was like, well, if it's revenue and profitability, which are the two kind of hallmarks of, the two things that most businesses look at in terms of financial and sustainable health. Luckily for us, revenue is directly linked to impact. So the more revenue we have, the more impact we can have. And from a, profitability focus, the more stable as a company we are, the more guarantee we can provide to our giving partners longer term. So I think for us, this goes back to the DNA. Like from day one, the model was built so that these two things are so inextricably linked that you can't undo them, and that if one is important, the other is naturally important because they're so tied together. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for speaking with us today. It's been very interesting. One thing I was curious about was the preparation you talked about before becoming an entrepreneur, because you hear a lot of entrepreneurs talk about learning on the job and faking it till you make it, that type of mentality. So what I was curious about is the split between how much you can actually prepare for what it's like and how much you actually learn once you're in the arena. And then with that, how did you handle the stress that comes with all of the uncertainty of starting a new business?
Great. Really good question. I did not go into the business saying I know everything. I use the analogy of starting a business from a preparedness standpoint the way that you would, like, if you were to approach climbing Mount Everest. A lot of people think like, oh, I just want the picture at the top of the flag. But like, you don't just show up, at the bottom of the Himalayas and start climbing one day. You have to figure out what gear you need, right? You have to, do body training to, get your body acclimated and make sure it's strong enough. But inevitably, no matter how much training and all the right gear you have, it's not you're still going to deal with a lot of uncertainty and still have to deal with the changing conditions and learn, along the way. And so I think the parallels are very similar. But before you start that hike, you want to be as prepared as you think you can be. So as much forward preparation you can have, it'll just make that journey that much easier. And similarly, I also, I use this analogy too to kind of help people understand, breaking the process down into steps and saying, I think a lot of people, they start and they're like, I have my aspirations of being 100 million, whatever your goal is. And far too often they're too focused on the outward goal rather than like, what do I need to do now? And they think about, we could be this big, and I'm going to think about the logo and the website. And it's like, well, have you thought about building a financial model? Have you thought about building a minimum viable product? Just test it with customers, get feedback. Like, try to break these things down into steps and focus on what do you need to do first before step 3, 4, and 5, because you're not going to get to the other steps unless you get to step 1. As far as the stress comment, I found that it was important for me to really make sure that I, recovered from the stress that naturally occurred to it. And I, like a lot of things that I've kind of said, in preparation for that, I looked at the behavioral habits and the things that other really, really high profile successful people or people who have very stressful jobs, like the president and, others, again, who have high stress environments, almost consistently, everybody at that top level meditates, almost everybody. And so I was like, okay, if Bezos and Steve Jobs and all these other people, very important big companies, if all of them are meditating, there's got to be value in that. And so I picked up a meditation practice, almost from immediately when I started. I always made sure I prioritized sleep. I get typically 8 hours of sleep every night because I know that if I'm not at my highest level, then I can't deliver and expect everybody else to be. And then throughout the years, I realized same thing, I prioritized exercise and I just prioritized taking vacation and downtime and letting myself fully recharge before I could, and by setting that right example, then everybody else did too. So I don't send emails on the weekend. I don't have meetings after kind of defined hours because from the top, people will emulate what you do. And if you work 100 hours a week, everybody else will, and then everyone's going to burn out. So you got to try to kind of find that balance. And if you are going to work 100 hours a week, kind of do it quietly with tell everybody, I worked on Saturday, because then they think that they have to work on Saturday.
Okay, so I think we need to get you out of here. You've got
in an hour and a half, so
a flight to catch. So
Yeah,
my apologies.
sorry.
We have to stop the questions. But Dave, thank you so much for showing our students.
thank you guys.
Thank you for showing our students what it really means to be a leader of consequence, and that you can both do good and do well. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it.